When it comes to visual novels and the correlation between the amount of character routes and the overall story length, I want to talk about the various benefits and disadvantages to the overall amount of character routes and what I personally think feels just right. So let's get into it. Talking about the overall correlation and story length, how many character routes is too many, how many is too little, and obviously I think it's something that depends deeply on just the person. You could have it to where you really enjoy the very lengthy, drawn out amount of routes and how much time you get to spend swapping around between different, maybe not perspectives, but maybe different realities. I think the most amount of character routes I've played in a visual novel so far is from Little Busters. I could literally sit here and count out every single character and try to get the exact amount, but I think it literally is 10 or more different character routes in Little Busters. It's been a while since I've actually read it, so I don't exactly remember just how long it took per route, but I think considering the overall playtime, it still kind of ended up around a similar amount of playtime as maybe some of the other visual novels that I'm going to give as examples. But I also remember, while I will say that Little Busters was a really wowing experience when I read it, that I do think between some of the various character routes, a lot of them felt very hit or miss, to where I think the ones that really stood out to me are exactly that. Whereas some of them are just kind of where it was just kind of part of the experience, but it was something that was easily forgettable. But looking at what I would say is the least potential amount of character routes in a visual novel being 2, I would say 2 is the bare minimum. One example that I played somewhat recently that's somewhat in my mind still is the Tsukihime remake. It's kind of a different thing because it was technically parts that were cut off from an original game that had more than just 2 routes. But in that example, I think while you get a good amount of time between both different character routes, and that you could say, hey, I'm playing maybe an 8 to 10 hour character route. For me personally, I kind of found it to be the same deal as Little Busters, where it was hit or miss, because I ended up liking one character route and then the other route I didn't really like. So in that way, I feel because it hits for 2 character routes, it's very okay, well, it's 50-50. And imagine the possibility of you play a visual novel with 2 character routes and you end up disliking both of them. Luckily, I've never experienced that. But I think in that same way, 2 character routes has potential, but at the same time could very easily maybe be this sort of distancing of well, you have to really land the execution, I think, when you do 2 character routes specifically. Bringing it down a little bit from that other side of the spectrum, I feel I played a lot of different 7 route visual novels in the past year. Off the top of my memory, I can name 3 of them, and somehow all 3 of them are from non-transitive visual novels. So these examples are going to be maybe more niche, but very recently I finished reading an Infinite Stratos visual novel that had 7 character routes, and then a visual novel maybe even only a couple months back was Mizuira Remake that I read as well. And then towards the start of this year, I read the PS2 version of Clear, and I think all 3 of those visual novels just so happened to have 7 character routes. And in some of those examples, they were actually games that had 5 character routes to begin with, but as there was an enhanced edition that came along later on down the line, they ended up adding 2 additional character routes. And so when playing the ultimate version or the complete edition of that visual novel, you end up getting 7. And I think 7 character routes is quite nice. I think it kind of has that same vibe as Little Busters, to where as you're reading it, maybe the character routes aren't as long as when you get closer down to cutting it down, right? You get this very nice feeling of, well, you get a lot more variety in 7 character routes, but at the same time, you're able to fight off that feeling that I had with Tsukihime, where if you're not really a fan of one route, you have a multitude of other ones to look forward to. But at the same time, it kind of is that feeling of maybe it ends up being around the same overall play length as a visual novel that has less character routes, but maybe you end up still enjoying this one a little bit more because of the fact that you feel you've experienced multiple different kinds of scenarios, to whereas in the ones that have less character routes, you're very much sitting down for an extended period of time. And I think that also kind of goes in line with 5 character routes. I think it's pretty much the same thing, but just maybe a little bit more compact, if that makes sense. And I feel I've read a fair amount of visual novels that have 5 routes as well. I want to talk about my personal favorite and what I think just hits right for me is visual novels with 3 character routes. Before I even talk about the comparing and contrasting of what I would say is a 3 route and a 4 route game, I want to talk about, I guess, what you could consider a 3 route game and how maybe it actually was poorly implemented, which is Maitetsu. We don't even have to look at the untranslated version of the game. Within the actual translated version of Maitetsu, you have 3 main character routes, but in addition to that, you kind of have little like side extra routes for the like side heroines, and in that way it maybe detracts from the overall experience, because in addition to having those 3 like what is unarguably the main characters, you have to spend time maybe writing an extra like hour or 2 of content for all the side characters. And I think while I really do enjoy that like kind of diverging path to where you get to the end of common route, you have some like sort of question and your answer dictates as to which character you're going to go with across all 3. I feel like in a way it was maybe still solid fundamentally, but at the same time does kind of detract because of all the like extra little stuff on the side that maybe you could argue Maitetsu isn't actually a 3 route like character route game, but I still think like at its core it is. But what I want to talk about maybe more so is the thought of Ubisoft. Now I haven't actually played a lot of the older Ubisoft games. As far as like what I have played in the majority is all of their translated stuff, and I guess going the oldest back would be Sabrina the Witch. But I have played one visual novel that was even older than that, being Natsuzora Kanata, and I think at some point there must have been some sort of shift, or where Ubisoft ended up deciding this is where they're going to draw the hard line and say, yes, 4 routes works best for us. And I think you look at a lot of the Ubisoft titles, Sabrina the Witch, Riddle Joker, Senran Banka, etc. They really have settled on the idea of 4 character routes. Plus, like I said with Maitetsu, maybe having 1 or 2 extra little side heroine routes, but I think it's like most people would agree that modern Ubisoft, it settles on 4 character routes, and I think it works pretty well for them. You have it to where I think there is a decent amount of variety, right? Where people are able to look and see 4 different main heroines and decide, okay, there's probably somebody for everyone. I would say because of how heavily Ubisoft leans into the idea of the dating sim and romance, landing on 4 character routes gives people enough variety to decide on like who's the waifu that you really like connect with out of every single of their titles. At the same time, I do think you get a decent amount of length out of every single character route, but it doesn't really feel as fleshed out. I remember something that's like a sentiment that I do share as well is my first Ubisoft title was Senran Banka, and I think a lot of people went into it kind of expecting a little more out of the story because of how they kind of built up the story. And then when every single character route is pretty much entirely romance, and any sort of like drama or like the main hook for the story within Senran Banka ends from the moment that you end common route, kind of left people a little bit questioning as like, whoa, there's so much missing potential here. Looking at Natsuzora Kanata, which is a non-translated visual novel that came earlier on into Ubisoft's career, that has 3 character routes and is only 3 character routes. There is no extra little side heroine route, and I think in total playtime might even be longer than your typical Ubisoft game nowadays. And I think what I would say is, for me at least personally, I really like visual novels that land on 3 character routes because you get all the benefits of like having enough diversity. If you really think that one route isn't that great, you still have 2 other character routes that could potentially wow you. So comparing to something like how I feel about Tsukihime Remake, where it's 50-50, you could land on like a 66%, right? Which I think is not nearly as bad. But in the example of Natsuzora Kanata, I ended up really appreciating how all 3 character routes are able to be quite like long-winded. You're able to continue on whatever is like the main hook of the story and kind of build on that throughout 3 different perspectives. You can approach the various like plot points from various different perspectives, right? You don't have to be like, okay, if I'm in one route where a lot of my time is spent maybe within this hotel where I'm interacting with this group of characters, but then on a different route, I'm in this like sort of hideout in the back sections of this forest located on the island that we're set in, and I interact with a completely different cast of characters. And then maybe this big event happens, and seeing how this event happens here, and then how it doesn't happen on this side, but then you think about the consequences of, well, if this event didn't happen, does this other thing actually do happen? And it's this kind of like thing of where 3 character routes, you're able to maybe, because of the connectivity and how you're not having to do too many different like connections between all the different lines, when handling something closer to that like 2 route or 3 route, you're able to maybe play around with the idea of how can we connect all of the various character routes together to where it pieces together and makes this one bigger, broader story, while at the same time being able to really flesh it out because of you have more time to dedicate towards every single character route, instead of spreading yourself so thin across, let's say 5 or 7, or in Little Buster's case, 10, right? 10 plus. I think for me personally, I really do enjoy the visual novels that land on 3 character routes for those reasons, and it was something that I figured would be kind of interesting to talk about. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Wave, and I will see you next time.